Hey everyone, this is Chris from DSX Machina, and I am online. It's a bit 2 minutes after 5, but close enough. I'm going live I should be live on YouTube and my 2 Facebook groups, my personal page, and my DSX Machina page. I'm going to be doing a couple of these, maybe at least 1 or 2 more between now and the end of the campaign. So if you guys have any comments or questions regarding DSX Machina, me, my projects, past, present, and future, and the Kickstarter, now would be the time if you want to throw some questions out. There's going to be another stream that we're going to be doing sometime. I'm not sure if it's going to be later this week or next week. We're just going to be making characters in the setting. So yeah. So basically that. I'm going to be just rambling on some questions that that some people have already sent me. And if you have any comments, throw them up here, and I will get to them as soon as I can. As of now, the campaign is still sitting around 47,000. Someone canceled just now, so we just went below, but we're pretty close to 47, which means we've effectively unlocked the 47 stretch goal, which is the satin bookmark. So the satin bookmark. And yeah, that's been unlocked. And then at 50,000, we have the paper quality upgrade to 100 gram. Now that is the same upgrade of paper that's in the Ultramodern redo. So when the campaign started, it was the same paper that was in the base Ultramodern, and now it's been upgraded twice. So now it's at the quality upgrade that we'll see in this book right here. And with the slipcase and spot UV, right now the Affinity trilogy is at the same production quality of the deluxe edition of Ultramodern, which is really, really cool. There's still one more stretch goal for the physical book, which is the foil press, which is going to be something that this book didn't have. And after that, the next upgrade, I think the next jump we're going to be seeing here is going to be the potential deluxeified version of that set, which we're hoping to have it to be a little crazy. Like it's going to be leather wrapped and maybe clasped and boxes and so forth. We're still working on that. Don't know if we're going to reach that goal. Obviously, the campaign slowed a little bit, but I'm still pretty confident we're going to hit those. Look at some of my questions here. One of the things that somebody brought up, and I wanted to mention, is that somebody was commenting about the relationship between the 3 settings. And I will tell you that a lot of people have made assumptions that the setting is similar to something like Torg or Rifts. I actually, so a little bit of an insight. My history of role playing is long, but it's very narrow. And what that means, I'm going to bring this a little closer so people can hear me. Perhaps we got a little bit of issue there. And what we're seeing is I started in the late 80s. I inherited Dungeons and Dragons from my brother's friend who was the GM, and he gave me a bunch of stuff. And that's the reason why I have a bunch of first edition prints of a lot of rare books like Fiend Folio, Monster Manual 1 and 2, and so forth. I played the basic red box D&D. I played D&D. I did second edition AD&D. We played a bunch of Star Wars, the West End version, the D6 system from West End Star Wars. When I went to high school, we shifted over to Palladium because we were big Robotech fans. We played Robotech a lot. And then when Artel-Zorian emerged, we shifted over to Artel-Zorian, where we played Cyberpunk 2013, 2020, and then Mechton. And then there was a bit of Rifts before we moved on. There was a big gap, and there was a bunch of GURPS hiding around in there until we got to the 2000s, and then it was 3.5 and 4th edition and 5th edition, and that's been it. So I know some people who have played dozens and dozens and dozens of games, and so people talk about some of the more well-known titles. Like, for example, I never played any of the Cthulhu games. I've never played any of the Storyteller games. I've never played Werewolf or Vampire. I've never played Shadowrun. I know very little of Shadowrun. I know the basic broad strokes of Shadowrun, enough that I know that when people made comments that they felt that Amethyst was like Shadowrun, I said, well, it's not a mix of magic and technology, and it's not cyberpunk. So there's the two things right there that don't fit. But I didn't know some of the details. I ended up reading some of it, and the more I read, the more I realized that Amethyst is nothing like Shadowrun at all. One other famous setting that people brought up that I never played was a title called Torg. Torg is something. I've been aware of Torg. I've never read Torg. I've never looked at Torg. It is a relatively old system, and somebody thought that Affinity was similar to Torg, and I once again, not knowing much about Torg, I looked up and I realized now there's nothing like it as well, which brings up a kind of common misconception people have with the setting, where it's 3 interconnected settings and people assume that it's some type of portal, or they're both on Earth and there's like 3 continents, or it's somebody said that they had actually thought for the longest time going into the campaign that these were 3 planets in the same solar system. And obviously that's not the case at all. And once again, people kind of see that idea that's an interrelationship between settings, and they automatically assume that it's a Rifts thing. It's a Torg thing. It's an idea that these are all occupying the same space. And that is not the case whatsoever. The settings are connected narratively, and there is never at any point a mechanic in the game that connects to the other titles. And that's the reason why we offered, if the titles were in fact connected to the point but they were different planets in the same solar system, or there was a portal that allowed you to leap from one to the other, then I wouldn't bother making the game available as a single book. I would say, no, you'd have to get all 3 because it's a complete project. It's 3 books, but it's a complete project. And so, yeah, obviously, since you can't order them, they must stand on their own. So, and that's the reason why, as a result, there's a little bit of duplication, not a lot. Anything that's critical to Ultramodern 5, that's going to carry over. And so when you see weapons and how weapons work in Taurus, they operate the exact same in Conestoga. So there's a little bit that's going to be duplicated. I'm not going to say, quick, refer to the Taurus chapter for rules on how does this happen. So none of that happens. As I've said in a couple comments, and I'll do this in a future update, there are several connecting threads, and they are entirely narrative. They are designed for a GM or whoever it is that are reading the books to be invested in the reading rather than, oh, I want to pull this mechanic out. Obviously, people will do that, but I want people to see the setting as having narrative value, right? The equivalent of having a novel and reading a novel. I want to have that. And obviously, there are narrative segments in there. We've seen the audiobook that John Fink has been doing, and we have 2 more that are coming out, one for Paradise and one for Taurus. We did the Conestoga one first. And I will say that that is one of the connecting threads. We know one of the connecting threads is the characters in this narrative that are talking and talking to other people and talking about having memories or dreams of the other realities. The characters in these stories are exactly the same in other stories. So there's a character named Noah, there's a character named Augusta, a character named Tanis, Sloan, Devin, Mana, and these characters, Cabdilla, and a few others, those names are in all 3 stories. And we also imply that in some way these are the same people in different realities. And as a result, some of their relationships are similar as well. And the stories are interconnected in that way, where you'll start seeing, a Sloan and Augusta meeting each other and then recognizing each other when they see each other for the first time in another reality and having that familiarity. So that's some of the stuff that's happening. There is a book which is actually in the mechanics of the game, and that book is narratively a very important MacGuffin in that story. And that book's called the Plex Codex, and the Plex Codex is mentioned in the fluff in all 3 books, although they have a different history because the book has moved through different hands and different stories. But the books are basically identical. And as some people may end up uncovering, it is not 3 identical books. It is actually the same book in all 3 realities, which has a lot of implications. There is also one monster and one monster only that's duplicated in all 3. He's mentioned in the last audio excerpt that we had on Saturday, and that is a character named Thinner. His stats are identical in all 3 games, but once again, that is done more narratively to kind of convey the point that he is exactly the same guy. And once again, like the book, he may be the same guy and not 3 duplicate people. But that's part of the mystery. There is a menace that's threatening all 3, and some people got the impression that this was some grand army. It is not. It is a force that's called virus. This virus manifests in 3 different ways in 3 different settings. So there's 9 total monsters. So there's 3 of them in one, 3 of them in the other, and 3 in the third. So 9 total monsters, but each of them are a little different sizes. Some of them are small, some are big. And Taurus, for example, I think Taurus has the largest virus manifestation, which is a virus worm, which is a very large monster. And once again, virus pops up in the narrative as well in 3 different ways, in a major way in one story, and then almost a cameo in the other. So they also play off of that as well. Every proper name is connected. That means that there are 12 empires in Paradise, 12 colonized domes in Conestoga, and 12 city-states in Taurus. And these all have the same names. Their history is also very related. Within the last 10 or 15 years, one of those empires got destroyed, called Volani. That has happened in all 3 stories as well. But beyond that, once again, they have a completely different mix of magic and technology. There's an 80-20 mix of magic technology for Paradise. It's 20-80, the opposite for Conestoga. And then there's 50-50 for Taurus. So it's very, very inspired by stuff like The Fountain. I thought of the idea when I was coming home from Cloud Atlas. And Cloud Atlas, the novel doesn't work this way, but the movie does, where we're constantly working between the 2, between all 6 settings or 5 settings, I can't remember. And the movie is the one that brought the idea of the same people being in different realities, because the book doesn't enforce that. There's only that tattoo or that birthmark of that star that pops up in all the stories. And other than the fact that the stories are all nested in some way into the other, which is something that the movie doesn't do. But I like the idea, but once again, playing on it being parallel realities. Originally, it was the constructed world of Paradise. It was a cylindrical spaceship of Taurus and then a planet. So a planet was Taurus, and then Conestoga was a spaceship, cylindrical spaceship. And it was only a few months ago, I would say sometime in late 2020, where I decided that what I was going to do is make all 3 of them artificial worlds. And that's when Taurus became the donut. And then it was only a couple of months ago, sometime in 2021, where I decided to change Conestoga from a cylinder to a peanut. And I kind of like that because it indicates there's no front and makes the idea of these colonies moving around the surface. They can now expand around it. And they're all very, very large settings. The Taurus is the same diameter as the Earth. I think it's a bit smaller. The Conestoga is about the same size as the United States. And the orrery is also quite large. It's not like the central world isn't as big as the Earth. I think if you were to say, take all of it together, I would say maybe Neptune would be a really good, accurate comparison. The outer shell would be the same as the outer atmosphere of Neptune. And so there would be a world and a bunch of other worlds. That may be too much. I'm trying to remember doing the scale in my head how big Neptune is. I think that's still not accurate. It might just be a couple times bigger than Earth. But I would say that when it comes to land mass, the orrery of Conestoga, of Paradise, is the largest of them. And then I'd say square footage, it'd be tough because there's no real depth in Taurus. It's just the surface of this donut-shaped world. On the other hand, the Conestoga you would assume, because it's smaller than the Taurus, it would have smaller real estate, but everything in that story is subterranean. We'll do that. It's subterranean, so basically the people are traveling through it. So now there's all the internal mass of this ship, which changes things drastically. So okay, so that was the interrelationships. What else did I want to mention here? The last stretch goal was 53 for the foil stamped. After that, we have a bunch of other stretch goals that add more content to the games. And after that, we have a bunch of larger ones. And that's when the stretch goals start to expand out a little bit because they do cost a bit more. That I have added the audiobook, even though a lot of people haven't really asked for it. I think it's really cool. And I think it's a neat idea and something I want to entertain. So sometimes I do things because I want to do them for myself. And I kind of, the soundtrack for Amethyst. I know a lot of people didn't ask for the soundtrack to Amethyst, but I wanted a soundtrack to Amethyst, so that was it. Hey, how you doing? And that was the I kind of lost my train of thought there. Got distracted by the comment. So there are a bunch of more stretch goals that will continue to expand all the way to 100K and beyond. I'm working with a new advertiser and hoping we're going to expand, and then we'll be able to blow through some of these other stretch goals. Because we're as of tomorrow, we're getting close to 2 weeks in it. So because our campaign started on March 30th, but we don't end on April 30th. We actually end on April 29th. So that's a little bit of a different. So like I said, guys, if you have any questions, please ask them. I'm just rambling on, waiting for people to comment or ask any questions that you may have. Somebody asking about adventures. The reason why I didn't include adventures in the core box is because as of now, there are already 200 pages. And I wanted to make sure that there was room in the budget to commission the art required to do that, because I can't just do a module. I have to commission some additional artwork. I have to commission maps, because that's what, some of them will have some assumptions in how, you'll be having a map or so forth. So I wanted to put them as a stretch goal because it was also going to expand the books. As of now, the books, I said, are still sitting around 213 pages, 210 and 207 respectively. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to increase. Yeah, the sound, oddly enough, I did the soundtrack with Amethyst. Because I've always used music. I've been using music in gaming. This is something I've been thinking about doing sometime in the summer, is a series of not really gaming advice or how to be a good GM, because I don't think I'm a very good GM. My ADHD kind of intrudes on that. And I think people, I'm probably rough on myself, because people look at the D&D streaming programs, right? And they're seeing how these people are running. And I'm like, wow, I'm not that way. And people said, yeah, no one is like that. Most people don't have GMs like that. So I'm very cinematic, and I've been using music since the early 90s. Back then, I had a tape deck, and I would run audio, and then sometimes I'd flip the tapes around from an audio track. Oh, that's too bad. And let's hope it's not a big problem. I hope it's nothing serious. Anyway, so I was using this tapes, and then I moved to CDs, and I would just pop in a track and I would play it, and it worked kind of well. But it wasn't until the late 90s when I got the idea, when I actually was running a game from my PC, and that's when the process started. I started grabbing tracks, moving them into specific directories. This is ambient, this is action, this is suspense. And then I started playing specific pieces of music. And as time went on, going through Amethyst, I started doing that, started creating specific pieces of music I wanted to play for certain sequences to create that cinematic nature. I did that for the first Amethyst campaign. I upped that a bit when I did my second Amethyst campaign. I added a bit more. And it was sometime during that same second campaign of Amethyst, which is be 2005, 2006 or so, that I started creating intros for my session. So before we would play, I would play an intro, which is kind of like a trailer or so. There was a piece of music. There's a bunch of footage, usually from cinematics from games. And I edited them together, and the group loved it. So I started doing that. Next thing, I started creating intermediate scenes from clips I've seen, and I would try to pick specific clips where the players wouldn't recognize where that was from. And I was doing all that. And then when I did Apotheosis, which is the fourth Amethyst campaign, which started a few years ago, I did the exact same thing. Extremely complex. And when I see people doing something similar, it's usually five or so scenes, a piece of music, usually out of place or terribly cliched. And then when I do mine, to give you an idea, I think the last one I did had 155 cuts in a 3-minute video. And it's just crazy. Of course, it's Amethyst, because Amethyst is the clash of magic and technology. So a lot of the cinematics involve a clash of magic and technology. So you have scenes of magic, scenes of technology, and so forth. When I did my Neurospastic campaign, I did the same thing. So music has always been really, really important to me. And I thought it would be really, really cool to have a soundtrack for Amethyst because I used it so often. The problem was that the person I tasked, I gave very specific ideas. I didn't want a Lord of the Rings style soundtrack. I wanted something a bit more ambient. I wanted something a bit more digital because Amethyst was kind of this techno fantasy, but it was a techno fantasy where magic and technology did not like each other. But to do that specifically, I wanted to have a soundtrack that was very much inspired by Cliff Martinez, who did soundtrack stuff like, I would say, Solaris. He did Solaris, and and Contagion, which is a fantastic movie, a bit too on the nose now, given the recent events. And I really like that. And I was pushing this composer to go in that direction. And unfortunately, the composer was a bit too married to, I don't say dubstep, but a certain type of music. And I kept on pushing him to go in this direction. And the first initial tracks I got from him, I thought weren't particularly good. And so I pushed hard. Eventually, I got some of the tracks I liked. And whenever you hear music, like the trailer for the trailer for the Ultra Modern Kickstarter, and the Kickstarter trailer for Affinity, are all using music from the Amethyst soundtrack, because it's obviously I don't have to worry about having to pay anyone, because I've already paid someone. It's music that I own the rights to. And if I did an Amethyst campaign, and spoilers, that's probably going to be the next campaign I do, I would love to return to that, but I'd want to find somebody that actually fits with what I'm looking for. And I have a bunch of people I've talked to. But at the time, Amethyst was a very low budget, and it had a $10,000 campaign and made 12. But this was 4 years ago, and hopefully we could do Amethyst again. Once again, it'll be for the third book. There's like 15 books in Amethyst, but there's only a third book in the series. Then I would want to do another soundtrack. I love the audiobook. I wouldn't think that an audiobook for Affinity would be an option, but John Fink it did such an amazing job with his first initial one, and then he got a group together and got that fantastic one that we played on last Saturday. It was just fantastic. So I love the idea of music, and I love the idea of incorporating music in gaming. And one of the biggest reasons why I don't do online gaming, the reason why I don't do Roll20, I don't do Fantasy Grounds, is that I don't have absolute control over how the game runs. It doesn't help the fact that 90% of the time there's no dungeon. So a lot of the Fantasy Grounds stuff, and I was just like, I don't care what dice people roll. You can hit every time. I don't care. I'm there to tell a story. I'm not there to kill you. So Knowing what people roll in their dice, don't care. I don't need to know. How are they playing their characters right? Don't care. It's not important to me. I'm there to weave a story. I am there to help the players tell the story. And I've actually mentioned it to the guy who runs the How to D&D cast, is that it is a cooperative game with, if you have 4 players, then there's 5 players because the GM is part of that group. And when you have a situation where it's us against them, where the GM is trying to kill the players, those are game sessions that don't last. And those are GMs that don't become a GM for very long. I have been a player very short. I'm not a very good player. I'm actually not a very good player. I fully admit that. I haven't been a player long. I'll be probably a year or 2 total in the 31 years I've been playing. I've been a GM for 90% of it. I did a little bit of gaming during just before the pandemic hit as a player, but from 1995 till now, it's been straight as a GM, whether it be running the Alien game I ran, which blew up about a week ago. I posted the fact that that site's down, but I was the guy who created Alien Fusion, and it turned into this gigantic thread of people that were commenting that they didn't know that I was the guy who did that, and that and the same website where the same Facebook group that talks about this game, they have the files of Alien Fusion there to download. So there's a ton of people that are playing this game that grew up playing mine, and it's fantastic, and I feel really old. So going back to music, that I have dozens of gigabytes of music. I've ripped every single CD that I own, and I have downloaded a bunch. I do not use John Williams. I do not use dance. I use a lot of ambient stuff. I love Cliff Martinez. I have all of his soundtracks, so I have all of that. I have a lot of Hans Zimmer. I use a lot of Hans Zimmer. I don't use anything from John Williams. And back in the 90s and even the 2000s, I was a big fan of Jerry Goldsmith. If Jerry Goldsmith made a soundtrack, I had it. And damn shame about, he passed away many years ago. I use a lot of Hans Zimmer. I use a lot of Johann Johannesson stuff is now popular. Too bad, unfortunately, he also passed away. Max Richter. I love the new age of digital, where it doesn't sound like digital. It kind of pushes itself into digital, but it doesn't feel like the MIDI music from the 80s. So yeah. Do you think you may make more content for one or more settings in the future, Affinity 2 or some such? Technically, I have 3 projects lined up, and the only reason why I was able to launch Affinity with Naramata, which is the board game, is that everything in Naramata is done. It has gone off to production prototyping. Everything's done, even the layout on the manuals are done. So that's all gone off. So and Affinity, I've been writing Affinity constantly from the end of the campaign in 2019 all the way through 2020. So all that writing is done. And the reason why we took it to Kickstarter was because they ended up being about twice as big as I had planned, and the art budget I had set aside wasn't enough to justify it. So I could jump into a Amethyst for my second campaign quite easily, because there's still about 200 pages of stuff in notes and other ideas that I could start working on and start diving into an Amethyst rather quickly. The other 2 projects I had, one is taking the 2 previous 5e setting books I've done, Apex and Neurospasta, and giving them the ultra modern redo work, taking them, adding more content, redoing the entire layout, redoing all the artwork for color. So they Neurospasta is like 223 pages, be about 230 because it would have new content. I probably wouldn't redo a new module, but it would be a new color version. Apex, which was always a small book, I would dive into that one, actually put a module in there for once, put a lot more detail, probably double the content of Apex, and have a lot more artwork, because Apex literally has like 3 illustrations in the entire book. Is the reason why it's only $5. I would go into there and make that, and then there would be a third new setting that I would add to it. So the Kickstarter campaign would be the color relaunch of Apex and Neurospasta, and then this new one. And this new one's called Boneyard. And the whole idea is to take all the mechanics, everything that's in Ultramodern, the races, the new classes, even the new magic and mecha system, and find a setting where everything in that book fits there. And it became this semi-post-apocalyptic story of of magic and wrecked spaceships that have crashed on this desert world. So it's not unlike that planet in The Force Awakens, except there's magic and stuff like that. And that setting would be the third setting, called Boneyard. The third project I'm working on is something called Heavenfall, and hi. Heavenfall is it's going to be very controversial. It's going to be so much so that I'm probably going to have to find I might have to find new artists even for it, because I don't know whether or not my current artists will be comfortable doing it, because it deals with the actual Christian apocalypse, but it spins it around. Yeah, isn't the Force magic? Yeah. It's funny, yeah, because whenever I am inspired by something, I make a note to kind of admit where the stuff is from. So the crafting system in Conestoga and the mecha, I mean, it's Conestoga is a bit of Dead Space and a bit of Anthem. I want to add a new class, which is kind of inspired by some of these new things that are popping up in some of these other live play of service games. Like I'm playing Outriders, and I think that's a cool idea. And Taurus, I don't think was really inspired. Paradise had a little bit of Game of Thrones in it, but the Boneyard isn't inspired by the Force or anything like that. It's inspired by a defunct game called Hard Space. It eventually turned into Homeworld 3: Deserts of Karak, and I love the idea of playing in a setting that's similar to Deserts of Karak, except it's more akin to the original story that they were writing before they turned it into Homeworld. Into a Homeworld prequel. So taking that, but then throwing in the races and the magic system out of Ultramodern, putting that in there. So if I was to do a follow-up, it would be that. So going back to Heavenfall is dealing with the Christian apocalypse, except the villains in the story would actually be the angels and the forces of heaven, and all the players are playing as humans that have not been raptured, and are teaming up with the demons to try to prevent the extinction of all existence. And so, players would be playing demons, half demons, and there would be technology about the idea of the fact we'd be flipping it so that the angels and the forces of heaven, that's the forces of Cthulhu, where seeing an angel would drive you insane, and not because that there's some kind of grotesque monster, but it's because their very presence can drive you kind of bonkers. So that's a project called Heavenfall. But thinking it over, I'm most likely going to do Amethyst for my next one. Let's see here. Oh, actually, going back to the question, so there isn't a plan for Affinity 2. I want Affinity to stand on its own, so I don't think I have plans for a follow-up for either 3 new settings or something that would follow up those 3 books. So I'm hoping Affinity kind of stands on its own. The thing about the short video intros I did is that, once again, the music wasn't original and the clips weren't original. I could throw one up right now and now would probably get flagged and kicked off of Facebook and YouTube. So they're great for showing people, 5 people in front of a TV. But to do the intros, I could probably do one for Amethyst because I have enough artwork and I have original music, but I don't think I have something. I couldn't do that for Affinity and show it off without stepping on somebody's copyright. So this was a big question that a lot of people popped up. Will you have recommendations in Amethyst how to allow characters to travel between the 3 settings? I know that when I first ran Affinity, that's not the case. How I ran things is that I wanted players to create three different, so the same stat line, so the same strength, intelligence, dexterity, and so forth, same name, same general disposition and personality, but they would have to create three different characters that had that same name and that same stat line. So they, and because of the way the setting is, technically in Conestoga and Taurus, you could play the same character maybe, but if you were a spellcaster, you couldn't be an Oxomancer in Conestoga because that's part of Taurus and so forth. So that's how I was going to do things. I was going to have the players create three characters with the same stat line, the same name. We would run one session, and then we would do it, and we play a session again, or we would run through a whole adventure. Then we would switch to the other game and run that and keep things fresh. But there would be this running story of the characters having these weird dreams and flashes from the other two realities. And the other shtick mechanically is that the characters would all share the same experience. So you would not have the Conestoga character at second level and the Taurus character at third. They would all be receiving experience for the exact same thing, so they would all advance at the same rate. And that was a way of, literally playing three games. And I've actually done that. I did that with the second Amethyst campaign I ran. The second Amethyst campaign I ran was I ran two settings simultaneously, but it was still Amethyst. So one was set on Earth, one was set in space, and we alternated weeks. So 1 week the characters were playing the people on the Earth, and the other setting was people playing up in space. So the group I was with, the first time I played Affinity, it didn't actually work. The group kind of collapsed. So we never got out of the Paradise setting. So we ran 3 or 4 sessions of Paradise and never had the opportunity to move into the other two settings. So that's why Paradise was already almost 100% written by the time we moved on. I started the Kickstarter because I already had most of that written. So when it comes down to it, I have a superhero story called Apex. I have a cyberpunk story called Neurospasta. I have my techno fantasy, which is Amethyst, and then I have Affinity. And earlier I spoke about the potential 3 projects I could be working on in the future: Boneyard, Heavenfall, or another Amethyst. But because obviously I have a lot of ideas, and Affinity, if the campaign ended right now, I wouldn't have a lot of excess writing to do. It would be editing and artwork, and within probably by June I'd be working on my next project. So even now I'm thinking about what the next project is going to be. So Heaven and Evil, that'd be controversial. I actually have to check that up. I know that a lot of animes love mucking around with Christian eschatology. To the point that I'm surprised they ever get them imported into North America, because they have no reservations stepping on established religious dogma. And sometimes the only thing to get away with is that they do it, I wouldn't say badly, but they step on them so horrendously that it's almost unrecognizable. They muck around with it so much. It's like the stuff that kind of upsets the Christian culture per se, because I was raised Roman Catholic, is that is when you touch on the subjects and you're close to it, where you actually get some stuff right, and that's why Dogma, the movie Dogma, was very controversial. That's why movies like Stigmata become controversial. When you have something that's just flagrantly wrong, no one cares. They don't seem to be bothered as much. But I think that's how the Japanese get away with it. They get so much wrong. Even what was that game? Dante's Inferno. Dante's Inferno had some controversy, but not as much. Like Grand Theft Auto generated 100 times more controversy than Dante's Inferno, which is blatant in your face hell. Now, the other thing about there's a precedent to this, because you play with the new Doom. The new Doom, it still presents. I'm trying to understand the setting, because I have to play in the game. I have to go on Wikipedia and read, because I was confused as all heck trying to understand what was going on, because it seemed like there's that hell is actually some kind of parallel universe, and that's where these monsters and these demons and they have this they have cybernetics and so forth. But it seems like that angels per se arrive, and they are a group of pan-dimensional aliens. They're not the Christian angels, and yet that kind of goes right through, and no one goes, "Oh, I don't care. It's just doom." No one cares. It's amazing. When you talk about hell in any capacity, Christianity never has a problem. It's when you step on the other side, that's when it gets upsetting, and that's where I'm going to annoy people. I did this in Amethyst. I flipped law and chaos, so the evil forces of darkness with the forces of law, and the good forces with the forces of chaos. I flipped that dynamic, and that was something that I pushed on. And this is building on that same idea, the idea that, taking that fundamental word of that Bible and taking it to that extreme, that, taking, I hate to say this about that, but, taking Kirk Cameron's idea and go, what if he is 100% right to the nth degree, and then creating a situation where all these people get raptured up to heaven and God sends all of his forces down to earth to wipe out everyone else and destroy reality. And the idea, of course, is once the last human being dies, then that existence collapses, because humans are basically a source of divine light. And once the last divine light goes out, reality and existence ceases to happen, and that entire universe folds in on itself. And knowing that for them, demons, it's opened up, and they rise up, but they don't rise up to kill humans, because the death of humans is the death of themselves. So they end up allying themselves with humans in order to stop the apocalypse. And so it's a war of heaven, except that humans and the player characters are on the other side, and we're presenting the heaven forces as the forces of antagonism. And there's some movies that have played on this. Prophecy played on something similar to this, where there was a war in heaven, and that once again generated a lot of controversy. And then we had the Paul Bettany film Legion, where we had a similar idea of where angels are not necessarily the nicest people. And in Heavenfall, the specific idea is there's two scales of angels, and one of them, the archangels, are the Ezekiel angels, these completely inhuman constructs that to look at them would drive you insane. Very much a Cthulhu-like thing, but instead of being this horrific thing that drove you insane, it was something that its very existence broke your mind, because it was some type of fourth dimensional construct. And if you look at Ezekiel's drawings of what these angels look like, they are in no way human. Like, they had multiple eyes and multiple heads, and they were wheels, and it's bizarre. And taking that and then presenting it as a story, but then making it so that, so many people like the idea of having half demon. We see all these shows, like we have a show called Lucifer, and in the show of Lucifer, I think God dies in Lucifer, if I remember correctly. There's actually a plot point where a new God shows up, and then the old God basically dies, and so there's a precedent. People would people have kind of grown more accepting of cutting into this. I think if I did this in the 80s when D&D was constantly being attacked, it wouldn't have worked, because there were role-playing games in the 80s and 90s that generated a lot of controversy because of their subject matter. I even, on another topic, even the GURP Cyberpunk, it was famous because they thought it was some kind of manifesto for hacking, and so the FBI raided their offices at some point. Yeah, so like I said, Heavenfall was certainly rubbed people the wrong way, and I'm not gonna lie, the artist I work with, completely 100% since the beginning, Nick. I haven't asked him. We haven't talked about this project yet, but I'm kind of wouldn't be surprised if he kind of felt didn't want to be part of it, and I would totally respect his decision. But yeah, what else have? So Heavenfall, like I said, it's not a new setting I've worked on. It hasn't moved beyond like both Boneyard, Heavenfall, or have not gone beyond the note stage. Amethyst, the thing is that Amethyst, there's original D20 Amethyst, which came out in 2008, about a month before 4th edition. And that setting got torn apart, redone. It's no longer canonical. And then Amethyst Foundation, which became Amethyst Compendium, and then all the other core Amethyst books, Quintessence and Apotheosis and so forth. That only takes up, I think, the first 200 pages of that D20 book. Then part of the original Kickstarter in 2015. It was 14. When I ran the new Amethyst, and that funded the sequel, which is called Amethyst Factions, and every rule system. That finished off North America and dove into South America. I actually have all the information of Europe, Africa, everything that happens in Asia. I have all of that already written down. And the D20 book did cover, at least in broad strokes, the entire world. So there is a lot of content. And remember, as I said many times, the story and the content that we have revealed, I've revealed in Amethyst. So you take up the core books and then factions, you add them all together. That takes up the first two seasons of my original Amethyst campaign that I ran in 2002. And I ran that campaign until 2011. There are 2 more seasons of Amethyst that people know, that finishes up that story, that tells about the Battle of Earth and so forth, and the forces of darkness and so forth. Then after that, there would be a new book called Apotheosis. Nope, that's Cradle. Cradle is the second one, and Cradle is set 500 years after the events of Amethyst. And it explores, goes beyond Earth, and we see what the universe is like outside of Earth, and how what happens on Earth has affected a lot of other things, and how everything is around us. And then there is I want to say, is it Apotheosis? Because I'm trying to remember now. Yeah, I think the third one was Apotheosis, and that one is set 5,000 years after the events of the previous one. And yeah, it's a huge jump in time. So, and that one's a lot of things have changed in the setting, some apocalyptic, some positive, some negative. It's a brand new story. Now ran for every one of these ran for 4 seasons, and seasons can last anywhere from 6 months to a year. And then I started the third one, actually a fourth one, which is a prequel of sorts. And we've been doing this ever since. So there is enough content in Amethyst for another 8 or 9 books. And I have written enough that I could dive into another Amethyst book. And considering that it's been a couple of years since I've worked on an Amethyst book, and I'm doing Affinity, I think there's a part of me that would rather do Amethyst as my next book, just because that's established. There is a fan following for that. It's already run a Kickstarter. We have it for Quintessence. The biggest question, of course, is the fact that Amethyst was noteworthy in the fact that it covered 6 different systems. It covered Pathfinder, 4th edition, 5th edition, Savage World, Fate Core. I always forget one. 4th edition, 5th edition, Pathfinder, Savage World, and Fate Core. Maybe it was only 5. And I would not be doing that again because it took 4 years to do the last Kickstarter, and that was because I don't know how other people. I cannot keep multiple systems in my head. I have to literally decompile one system and put the other one in. So when I'm writing the 13th age, I know how to play 13th age. I forget how to play 5th edition. And so, and of course, and on top of all that, creating monsters for Pathfinder, at least the original Pathfinder, was a nightmare. It took me a month just to do that one chapter. And that's why it took so long. So, and the unfortunate thing is, if I did an Amethyst, I would not be doing it for all those systems. The Fate and Savage Worlds were done by Chris Stilson. And if he decides he wants to do them, I'll let him, and then we'll cover and we'll support Savage World, and we'll do Fate. Despite my love, I will not be writing for 13th Age again, so that one's been cut, and I won't be writing for 4th edition, so that's been cut. So if we do another Amethyst, it'll be 5th edition. It might be Pathfinder. I don't know. I have to pick up Pathfinder version 2, and I have to learn it and see whether or not I can adapt the Amethyst Pathfinder book to the 2nd edition And then the question is, do I release the next book for Pathfinder 1 or Pathfinder 2? I know a lot of people who did not want to upgrade to Pathfinder version 2. So that's something I have to research. I go, do I bother supporting Pathfinder 2, or do I just still stick with researching and supporting Pathfinder 1? Or are they close enough that I can support both versions with just a little bit of a download or something? That's something I have to research. So, but yeah, no, unfortunately, if I do another Amethyst, I will not be supporting all those systems because I do not want to spend 3 years writing these books. You're 100% correct. Yeah, it's interesting, and this is a joke because I many years ago I dated a girl from China, and she wasn't a Chinese girl living here. She was living in Guangzhou, and I flew down to see her. I flew down to Hong Kong. We stayed some time in Hong Kong, and then we went to Shenzhen, to Guangdong province, and then from there we went around, took some trains up, went to Taiyou in Hunan province, and when I ask about Chinese and religion, she's like, "Oh, we're not religious in China." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then we passed a Buddha temple, and she kind of does her respects to Buddha. So and then the joke was like, "Oh, so you're not religious? Buddha is just the default. Everybody in China it's just everyone like it's you. They don't. It's we're not. It's like we're not religious at all. We just pray to Buddha." I'm like, my brain wanted to melt out of my ears. But yeah, they do look at organized religion in the West very, very differently, especially in Japan. Would Heavenfall be modern fantasy or techno fantasy? I know it's probably some time away, but you still got me super interested and invested in this setting. It is, because it's an ultra modern setting, it would be heavy techno fantasy. Once again, I would play on the idea of the playable characters would be, you could be a regular human, and there'd be, because the hell has risen, there's a form of magic, so that you can be a spellcaster again. I would probably create a new magic system, because God knows I've written 3 so far, so why not make a 4th? And or like I said, I could pull the magic system out of Ultramodern and use that, because it would perfectly fit. And the idea that I wouldn't present the demons as like we see on Doom, the Doom demons. They would have technology. They would be able to use technology, and it would be in the modern day or partially in the future. But the idea also is that heaven is also technologically, present. They have machines, but they're not machines that you can imagine. And of course, there's actually a bunch of stuff that I've written. I don't want to reveal, but there's a lot of stuff that people look at it and go, "Oh, this is not biblical Christianity. This is a fictional version of Christianity that's inspired by Christian eschatology." Because, it'll be, this is a book written 2,000 years ago by people that only got half the picture, but it's still going to be enough to kind of annoy people. But I like the idea of players playing, you could have a human character, and he's a human, so he has the divine light, and that would be an actual feature. And the whole objective of the entire setting is that you have to make sure that humans that are on Earth do not die, because every human that dies is closer to darkness. And you can play demon characters. You can play half-breeds, and you can play demons, but the demons and half-breeds don't have the light. So yeah, they still be characters. And the thing is that I would have a bunch of monsters, like in the monster entry, and there'd be a bunch of demons. Right, what we think of as demons. You can have Lilith and other ones and so forth, and none of them are evil. They're all chaotic, but they're not evil, right? And that's the thing goes once again playing on the same idea of Amethyst, the fact that the forces of heaven are still law and entropy and so forth, and then the forces of chaos, that connection is still there, because if you really look at it. Hell, and you look at the stories in Genesis and so forth, a lot of it is about free will, and a lot of it, even the story of Lilith, because this Lilith, this horrible demon character, and you read her history, and you're like, boy, was that written by men, So there's a lot of stuff there you can tap, but that's a lot of people today look back on these historical documents and they look back and go, oh, you look at it as a different light. Lilith is not the demonic character everyone writes her out to be. That's why we have Lilith Fair, which is a very famous concert. But yeah, like I said, it's complex. It's one of those things where I would love to sink my teeth into it. But it'll come down that I'll probably, like I said, I believe in the democratization of gaming and Kickstarter as well. So I'm always open to suggestions. So I might even put it to a vote. I may say, well, what do you guys want? You guys want Heavenfall? You want re-release of Apex Neurospasta with Boneyard, or do you want Amethyst? And just leave it up to everyone to vote and then see what wins. Because I will say the Amethyst one would be the easiest one to launch, because the issue with Affinity was the fact that I had all this artwork that was black and white. So I had to recommission Nick to create a bunch of new color artwork. But there was only so much money I could spend, because part of the Kickstarter is raising money to pay for that. If I could pay for all the artwork, then I wouldn't have the problem. Because unlike other Kickstarters that people run, like you can see Simon run a Kickstarter. I know one guy said he canceled his pledge, not because he didn't like me. He loves the campaign, but he wanted to pledge for the Simon. Simon is one of those many companies that don't require a Kickstarter, and it shows in their campaign. The entire game has been made. It's a pre-order service, and I don't. I ran Ultra Modern. If it didn't fund, you wouldn't have gotten that product, right? I needed the funds to pay for the artwork. And Affinity is exactly the same way. So I didn't have a lot of lead-in budget to pay for the artwork, which is the reason why Affinity, it looks as slick as I can make it without showing you what the color version is going to look like, because I only have 2 or 3 illustrations. In fact, I had a conversation with Nick last week where I said, we were finding ways of trying to produce more artwork on a cheaper budget so we can produce more. And I went to him, I said, okay, I want you to figure out all that. I want to go back to creating really high quality stuff that still fits in with the aesthetic that we're presenting. This idea, this found book, that it feels like it's a book that you would find in your adventure. But I could only do that once we reached a certain goal. Other than that, so that's the reason. So if I did an Amethyst campaign, I could easily put a very slick campaign, because I have like 200 full color illustrations from 10 years of working with Nick on this stuff. I have amazing amounts of illustrations. People who have, I know some people who said they've been following me since Alien Fusion. So, and with the original Amethyst, so they know how much amazing artwork has been made, both black and white and color. So if I was to do an Amethyst campaign, I can make it incredibly slick, because there is so much artwork. If I was to do Heavenfall, I would have to start completely square one. I have to spend 5,000 or 6,000 developing art assets for just that Kickstarter campaign, which could fail. And that's why it's a big risk. The Apex Neurospasta relaunch paired with Boneyard would be easier, because once again, I have all the artwork from Apex and Neurospasta, not all of it in color, but I do have a lot of color illustrations. Neurospasta has got some great illustrations, so does Apex. And I could make a campaign, because remember, the whole point, Kickstarter campaigns, they can cost obscene amounts of money to get going. Look at my Ultramodern campaign. It did very, very well. I was so happy how successful it was, because we got to make this amazing book as a result. But look at the campaign itself. It's pretty, I wouldn't say amateurish, but it was the best I could do. And I don't have a lot of skills. Nick did a few art assets. I played a bunch with other things. Mark Meir, who for some reason is friends with me, he did the narration for that. So I was very, very lucky to have a very slick product. When we did Naramata, I got in touch with somebody that could do really good layout, which is Leah. And then she built me this fantastic Naramata page. So I said, by the way, I need you to do the Affinity, which is the reason why Affinity looks as good as it does. And so we'll be doing that in the future. But that costs money. Like there was good $3,000 or $4,000 built up in just trying to get the thing going. And I do get favors. Like John Fink did the narration on gratis. So did every other person who did the narration. So, that's how this operation runs. This is not like, when Pathfinder goes to Kickstarter, it's a very different operation. There is only a handful of employees. There's me, there's Nicole, there's Nick, and Nick's in North Carolina, and Chris Stilson is in Edmonton, and we have never met. And that's our operation. First one I did with Ultramodern 4. Yeah, Ultramodern 4 was a giant middle finger to everyone who said that you couldn't create non-fantasy with fourth edition. If the fourth edition was designed for fantasy and fantasy alone. I actually saw people doing that, and I got so much flack for Amethyst. People saying it was against the spirit of fourth edition, and I would call people out and ask them, "What does that mean? Please explain to me what that means." And they couldn't follow that up. There was something about it that just rubbed them the wrong way. So by the time I took the fantasy elements out, made Ultramodern, ignored the haters, and just created the system that I felt worked, that did very well. And that's how it happened. And so with that, when we did Ultramodern 5, which I wasn't expecting to blow up, that was the same thing. I took the fantasy elements out of Amethyst, which this time there's Amethyst Quintessence, and released it, which is the reason why Amethyst Quintessence came out in May of that year, and then Ultramodern came out in August of that same year, because I had all the art assets from Ultramodern 4, and I had all the rules from Amethyst Quintessence, and went that out not thinking it was going to explode, and then it did, and the rest is history. So Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, but playing as humans, half humans, and daemons. I mentioned the newer Doom games as a visual reference in terms of technology. Yes and no. There's like I said, I think there is definitely some inspiration there. Once again, it would really depend on the artist I get, on the art style we go for. I definitely like the idea of something that's post-apocalyptic. I like the idea of the angels being semi-techno magic, and then the demons being a techno magic, but being a different style. So, didn't Gamma World have a 4E supplement? Okay, I never played it, but to my knowledge, the Gamma World 4E supplement was not a true 4E game title. I do believe it was kind of like a card game. I'm trying to remember, but I know that it didn't give people what they wanted. And the Gamma World 4E supplement, if I remember correctly, did not create rules to play 4th edition D&D and non-fantasy. It was something that was very unique. If I remember correctly, I do believe somebody might have told me it was a card game that employed 4E mechanics, but it wasn't something that was compatible with, you couldn't take the Gamma World rules and then push it back into D&D like you could with Ultramodern. So, but yeah, I knew of it, but I never got a chance to see it because apparently not a lot of people bought that. I've never seen it for sale. I've never seen the Gamma World 4E stuff for sale. I'm on the Gamma World Facebook group all the time because they're a big inspiration, and I talk to them all the time. Some of the races in Ultramodern came out because I wanted to satisfy the crowd. There's two crowds I like pandering to. Because I have some loyalty, because I grew up with them. Because I don't know if I still do. I may actually still own a 1st edition Gamma World, like 1st edition, like that old, like no color, all black and white, the original TSR one. And the other one back then, I also had some loyalty is Star Frontiers. And case in point, my Serena Dawn original website, Serena Dawn is named after a space station in the basic core box of Star Frontiers. So I do pop up. I'm members of the Star Frontiers and the Gamma World Facebook group. So I talk to them all the time. Whenever I have a campaign, I try to bring them into the fold, and they're good people, very nice people. So we're reaching on an hour here, so I don't want to run much longer past that. So I'll wait for another few seconds to see if there's any more questions. Hoping to see. We had a backer jump on while we were talking. That was nice. Thank you very much. Does that mean we are? I think that means we are, oh yeah, just a few bucks short from 47. Oh, you like that, by the way? Of course, it's inverted. So, at some point, that was full of all Gundam models, and I just have just a handful left. Top row, there is my Signar War Machine Army, which uses which is a purple tone, which I know is not canon. Below that is Nemesis, the board game Nemesis. I have all those painted. And then below that is my, can't see it. There it is. That is my my Desert Scheme Tau Army for 40K. And if you go across that bottom, you'll see my extremely old Tyranid army. We're talking, there's models in there from first edition. Most of those models are metal. That's how old those guys are. And then if you go up high, just back there, top shelf, you can see one of the Gundam models in the background, and those models in the foreground there are from the Robotech Tactics failed Kickstarter game. I was not a backer. I bought that after the fact. And that is from that. And oddly enough, I may be getting some more Robotech minis in the future. But oddly enough, I haven't played War Machine in maybe 3 years. I haven't played Warhammer in maybe 6 years. So I just, I never have time. And of course, now with COVID, when am I going to get the opportunity? Okay, with that, guys, I will leave you to it. Great talking to everybody here. Like I said, the next time we do one of these, I'm probably going to be doing a live stream with two of my friends where we're going to create characters in all 3 settings, hopefully in the same manner that I discussed. Same stat line, same name, but different characters in the 3 different settings. So hopefully we'll get a lockdown of when that's going to happen, and you will see it live on Facebook and on YouTube. So anyway, guys, it's been an hour. This has been Chris from Deus Ex Machina. Thank you for all your support. For everyone who's backed the campaign, we are not even halfway through it yet. There's still a ton of things to reveal, a ton of things to happen. So have yourselves a pleasant evening.